Reddit, what is your r/NoSleep story that actually happened? It's a question that brings out the darkest, most unexplainable corners of reality. Most stories on that sub are fiction, but these ones, the users swear, are 100% real. I used to live in a small apartment on the 4th floor. One night, around 3 a.m., there was a knock at the door. 3 slow, methodical knocks. I looked through the peephole, but the hallway was pitch black. I shrugged it off as a prank and went back to bed. 5 minutes later, the knocking started again, but this time it was coming from my bedroom window. I was 4 stories up with no balcony and no fire escape. When I pulled the curtain back, I saw handprints on the outside of the glass. They weren't pointing up as if someone climbed, they were pointing down, as if someone had been hanging from the roof to look inside. I'm curious, did you ever find out if anyone was on the roof? Because the thought of someone dangling upside down just to stare at you is way more terrifying than any ghost. When I was about 16, I was home alone playing video games in the basement. I heard the front door open, heard my mom's heavy footsteps, and heard her set her keys on the counter. I yelled, "Hey Mom, can you make me a sandwich?" And she replied, "In a minute, honey." About 10 minutes passed and no sandwich. I went upstairs to complain, but the house was empty. The keys weren't on the counter. I called my mom and she was still at work, 20 miles away. To this day, we both have no idea whose voice I heard or who entered that house. This happens way more than people think. It's called a mimic. There are thousands of stories on Reddit about people hearing their loved ones' voices when they aren't home. It's the one thing that truly makes my skin crawl. I worked as a night shift security guard at an old, decommissioned hospital. One night, I saw a woman in a patient gown walking down the end of a long hallway. I called out to her, thinking she was a trespasser or someone lost. She turned into a room. I followed her in, but the room was a dead end with no windows and the only door was the one I just walked through. The room was empty. But the air was so cold I could see my breath, and on the dusty floor, there were fresh footprints leading to the center of the room and then just stopping. I've worked night shifts in old buildings too. You start to see things after a while, but the physical evidence like footprints? That's when you quit. That's not a hallucination. My daughter used to talk to an imaginary friend named the Tall Man. She said he lived in her closet. Standard kid stuff, right? One day I walked past her room and heard her giggling and talking. I asked, "What is the Tall Man doing?" She looked at me dead serious and said, "He's standing right behind you, Daddy. He says your hair smells like rain." I had just come in from a thunderstorm and hadn't seen her yet. I moved us out of that house a month later. Kids are like magnets for this stuff. They haven't learned to filter out the supernatural yet. If a kid tells you there's a man in the closet, believe them. I was driving through a rural part of West Virginia late at night. The road was empty for miles. Suddenly, my headlights hit something in the middle of the road. It looked like a person, but they were hunched over on all fours, moving with a fluid, predatory gait that no human could replicate. As I sped past, it kept pace with my car for a solid 10 seconds, looking through the passenger window with eyes that reflected the dashboard lights like a cat's. Then it just darted into the woods. I didn't stop driving until I hit the state line. That sounds like a classic r/NoSleep skinwalker story, but the fact that people keep reporting the exact same movement, though all 4 sprint, makes me think there's something actually out there in the woods that we haven't classified yet. I lived in a house where the previous owner had passed away in the living room. One night, I was watching TV and I felt a hand rest firmly on my shoulder. I was alone. I froze, too scared to move. Then, a voice whispered right into my ear, "It's time to turn it off now." The TV immediately lost power, and the remote was across the room. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Sometimes they aren't malicious, they just still think it's their house and they want you to follow their rules. Still, I would have had a heart attack right then and there. The scariest thing isn't the ghosts, it's the people. I found a hidden camera in a smoke detector in my Airbnb last year. When I checked the SD card, there were videos of me sleeping from the night before, and a video of the host coming into the room while I was unconscious to move the camera for a better angle. I never felt safe sleeping in a hotel again. This is exactly why I check every single vent and electronic device when I travel now. Reality is much more terrifying than fiction because there's no the end when a real predator is involved. Sometimes the world is a lot stranger than we want to admit. Whether it's a mimic in your kitchen or a stranger in your walls, these stories remind us that we are never truly as alone as we think we are. Sleep tight. If you can. I was a forest ranger in a national park for about 8 years. The strangest thing I ever saw wasn't a cryptid or a ghost, but a staircase. Just a plain, white, carpeted staircase in the middle of the woods, about 10 miles from the nearest trailhead. No house, no ruins, no foundation. Just stairs leading to nowhere. My veteran partner told me, never go near them, and never climb them. He wouldn't explain why, but he was dead serious. Later, I found a report of a hiker who went missing in that exact area. When they found his body, he was miles away, but every bone in his body was shattered as if he had fallen from a great height even though he was found in a flat meadow. I've heard so many stories about those stairs in the woods. Search and rescue officers all over the world seem to have unwritten rules about ignoring them. It's like they're a glitch in reality that nobody wants to acknowledge. I moved into a cheap studio apartment in an old building. Every night at 2:14 a.m., the person in the apartment above me would drop what sounded like a heavy bowling ball. It would thud once, then roll across the floor for a few seconds. This went on for months. Finally, I went upstairs to complain. The door was slightly ajar, so I peeked in. The apartment was completely gutted, no furniture, no floorboards, just exposed beams and dust. I checked with the landlord, and he told me that floor had been vacant and locked since a man died there in the 90s. He died from a head injury after a heavy piece of machinery fell on him. The fact that it happens at the exact same time every night is what makes it terrifying. It's like a residual haunting, an event so traumatic it imprinted itself on the building, playing over and over like a broken record. When I was a kid, my sister and I shared a room. She was a chronic sleepwalker. One night, I woke up and saw her standing in the corner, staring at the ceiling. I called her name, but she didn't move. I got up to lead her back to bed, and as I got closer, I realized she wasn't staring at the ceiling, she was looking at something that was looking back at her. A pair of eyes reflected my nightlight from the darkness of the ceiling corner. I screamed, my dad ran in and flipped the lights, and there was nothing there. But my sister woke up crying, saying the ceiling man told her it was her turn to hang. I got chills reading this. Sleepwalking is scary enough, but when the sleepwalker interacts with something you can actually see? That's where I draw the line. I worked as a late-night radio DJ. We had a caller who would phone in every Friday night at 1 a.m. He never spoke, he would just play a recording of children playing and laughing. I thought it was just a weird prankster. One night, the caller didn't play the recording. Instead, he whispered my home address and told me exactly what I was wearing at that moment. I looked at the security monitors and saw a man standing at the station's perimeter fence, holding a vintage rotary phone that wasn't connected to anything. He was looking directly into the camera and smiling. This is why I can't handle stalker stories. There's something so much more visceral about a human predator who knows where you live than a ghost that's tied to a house. I used to work in a high-rise office building. I was the last one out one Friday night. As I was walking to the elevator, I heard a printer start up in the darkened cubicle farm. It printed one page. I walked over to see what it was, thinking a colleague had sent something by mistake. It was a grainy, black and white photo of me standing at that exact printer, looking at the page. The timestamp on the photo was 1 minute in the future. I didn't wait to see who took the photo, I took the stairs all the way down. That is absolutely terrifying. A threat from the future? It's like the universe is giving you a 1-minute head start to save your life. I hope you never went back to that office alone. I was driving home on a back road in rural Georgia. I saw a woman in a white dress standing by a bridge. Classic hitchhiker setup. I didn't stop, because I've seen too many horror movies. As I passed her, I looked in my rearview mirror. She wasn't there. Then I heard a soft tapping on the roof of my car. I was going 60 miles per hour. The tapping moved to the rear window. I looked back and saw a face pressed against the glass, upside down, smiling with way too many teeth. I didn't stop until I saw a police cruiser at a gas station. There were deep scratches in the metal of my car's roof the next morning. The scratches are the worst part. You want to believe it was a trick of the light or your imagination, but the physical damage proves that whatever it was very real and it was on your car. I spent a week in a remote cabin in the woods. On the third night, I started hearing a scratching sound coming from under the floorboards. I assumed it was a raccoon. But then the scratching started following me. If I walked to the kitchen, the scratching moved to the kitchen. If I went to the bathroom, it was right under my feet. I yelled, "Leave me alone!" And the scratching stopped. Then, a voice from directly under the floorboards whispered, "But it's so cold down here, and you look so warm." I slept in my truck with the engine running that night. The frogging phenomenon is real and it's nightmare fuel. Imagine someone living in the crawlspace beneath you, watching your every move through the gaps in the floor. Reality is often stranger, and much more dangerous, than anything we can invent. Whether it's glitchy stairs in the forest or a voice from the floorboards, these stories serve as a reminder. Sometimes, when you feel like you're being watched, it's because you are. Stay safe out there. I used to work as a night shift janitor at a local elementary school. The school was built in the late 1920s, so it had that creepy, institutional vibe even during the day. One night, I was mopping the long hallway near the gymnasium when I heard the sound of a ball bouncing. Thump. 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 It was coming from inside the locked gym. I opened the door, expecting to find a student who had snuck in. The gym was pitch black, but the sound was loud and clear right in the center of the court. I shined my flashlight, and the bouncing stopped instantly. There was no ball. But then, I heard a child's voice from the bleachers whisper, "He's behind the curtain." I didn't look. I clocked out and never went back to finish that shift. I've heard similar stories from janitors. There's something about schools at night, they aren't meant to be empty. The residual energy of thousands of kids is bound to leave something behind, and it isn't always friendly. A few years ago, I bought an old Polaroid camera at a garage sale. It looked like it was from the 70s and still had a film pack inside with 3 shots left. I took a photo of my dog just to see if it worked. When the photo developed, my dog was there, but standing behind him was a tall, blurry figure in a black suit with no face. I thought it was a double exposure or a glitch in the old film. I took a second photo of the empty hallway. Same figure, but this time it was closer to the camera. Panicked, I pointed the camera at my own feet and took the last shot. In that photo, the figure's long, gray fingers were resting on my shoulders. I threw the camera in the trash and burned the photos. This is the stuff of actual nightmares. Old film is notorious for capturing things the human eye can't process fast enough. You probably caught a hitchhiker entity that was attached to the camera itself. I was a dispatcher for a small-town police department. We got a call at 2 a.m. from an elderly woman who said there was a man standing in her backyard, just staring at her through the sliding glass door. I stayed on the line with her while the officers were en route. She started screaming, saying the man was tapping on the glass with a rhythm. Tap. Tap tap. Tap. She said he was smiling and holding up a sign. I asked what the sign said. She whimpered, "It says, 'I'm already inside.'" The officers arrived 2 minutes later. They found the woman alone, but every single clock in her house had been stopped at exactly 2 a.m., and there were wet footprints leading from her basement to the spot right behind her chair. The "I'm already inside" trope is a classic, but hearing it from a dispatcher's perspective makes it 10 times worse. That's a level of psychological torture that no one should ever experience. I live in a rural area where the houses are miles apart. One night, my Alexa device started talking out of nowhere. It didn't do the usual, I didn't understand that routine. It just said, "There is someone at the front door. He says he knows you're home, Sarah." My name isn't Sarah. My name is Elena. I checked my Ring camera, and there was a man standing there in a suit, holding a dead crow. He looked directly at the camera and said, "I know your name isn't Sarah, Elena. I just wanted to see if you'd answer." He stayed there for 3 hours, just standing perfectly still, until the sun started to come up. The fact that he used a fake name just to bait you into correcting him is a high-level predator move. These smart home devices are being hacked more often than people realize, or worse, they're picking up things they weren't designed to hear. I was camping alone in the Pacific Northwest. I'm an experienced woodsman, so I don't get spooked easily. Around midnight, the forest went completely silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Then, I heard a voice that sounded exactly like my mother calling my name from the treeline. My mother has been dead for 10 years. The voice was perfect, the same pitch, the same inflection. It said, "It's cold out here, come help me." I knew better than to leave the light of the fire. I stayed put with my hatchet in hand. The voice eventually got frustrated and started screaming in a sound that didn't even seem human anymore, like a hawk being crushed. In folklore, they call those flesh gators or mimics. The golden rule of the woods is, if you hear a family member's voice where they shouldn't be, know you didn't. Keep your eyes on the fire and don't ever answer back. My grandfather was a lighthouse keeper. He told me a story about a night when the fog was so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. He heard a massive thud against the side of the tower, like a ship had hit it. He climbed down to the base to check for damage. In the fog, he saw hundreds of deep-sea fish, creatures that should never be near the surface, scattered on the rocks, as if they had been dropped from the sky. And in the middle of them, there were footprints that looked like a human's, but each step was 10 feet apart, leading straight into the ocean. There are things in the deep ocean that we haven't discovered yet, and some of them might not even be biological. The giant humanoid sightings at sea are some of the most consistent reports from sailors and lighthouse keepers throughout history. I woke up at 3:33 a.m. to the sound of someone whispering in my ear. It wasn't words, just a low, rhythmic chanting. I couldn't move, classic sleep paralysis. But then, I felt the bed sink down next to me, like someone had sat on the edge of the mattress. I felt a cold hand stroke my hair. Usually, sleep paralysis hallucinations vanish when you wake up fully. But when I finally broke out of it and sat up, there was a deep indentation on the pillow next to mine, and the room was freezing cold. Sleep paralysis is the brain's way of keeping us from acting out our dreams, but when it leaves physical evidence like a cold room or a dent in the bed, it's not just your brain anymore. Something was there with you. These stories remind us that our homes, our schools, and even the deep woods aren't as safe as we'd like to believe. There are layers to this world that we only see when the sun goes down. Keep your doors locked, and if you hear your name being called from the darkness, don't look back. I used to work as a late-night security guard for a massive cemetery in New England. It was a garden-style cemetery, meaning it had lots of trees, hills, and winding paths. One night, around 2 a.m., I saw a woman sitting on a bench near a very old mausoleum. I approached her to tell her the grounds were closed. As I got closer, I noticed she was wearing a dress that looked incredibly heavy and out of place, like something from the 1800s. She didn't look up, she just kept staring at a small patch of grass. I asked if she was okay, and she finally spoke. She said, "They forgot to put the stone back." I looked down, and there was a small, rectangular hole in the ground where a grave marker should be. When I looked back up, the bench was empty. The next morning, I checked the records. A headstone had been stolen from that exact spot 3 days prior. The fact that spirits only seem to appear when something is wrong with their resting place is a common theme. It's like they're tied to the physical world by their markers, and when the marker is gone, they're stuck in a loop trying to find it. When I was in college, I lived in a house with 4 other guys. We started noticing that our things were moving. Not disappearing, just moving. A toothbrush would be on the kitchen table, or a shoe would be in the middle of the stairs. We blamed each other for months. Then, one night, we all went out to a party except for one roommate who stayed back to study. He heard a noise in the attic, a rhythmic scraping sound. He took a baseball bat and went up there. He found a woman living in the crawlspace behind the water heater. She had been there for 6 months. She had a nest made of our stolen clothes and was keeping a diary of our daily schedules. The scraping sound was her sharpening a kitchen knife on the wooden beams. This is a real-life horror story. Frogging is terrifying because it's not supernatural, it's a calculated, human invasion of your most private space. You weren't being haunted, you were being hunted. I was a long-haul trucker for 15 years. I've seen a lot of weird stuff on the road, but nothing like the empty truck. I was driving through a desolate stretch of Nevada at 3 a.m. A black semi-truck pulled up alongside me. It had no logos, no license plate, and no lights on in the cab. I looked over at the driver's seat, and it was empty. The steering wheel was moving on its own. I sped up, the truck sped up. I slowed down, it slowed down. This went on for 20 miles. Suddenly, the truck's high beams flashed a blinding, blue-white light and it veered off the road directly into a canyon. I stopped and called 911. When the police searched the canyon, they found nothing. No wreck, no tire tracks, just a sheer drop into the dark. Ghost ships are one thing, but a ghost semi-truck in the middle of the desert is a whole new level of no sleep. It's like a phantom memory of a fatal crash that hasn't happened yet, or happened a long time ago. I worked at a high-end hotel as a night auditor. We had a guest in room 412 who complained every night about the crying child in the room next door. The problem was, room 414 was empty. It had been undergoing renovations for weeks. One night, the guest called down, sounding absolutely terrified. He said the child wasn't crying anymore, he was scratching at the wall between their rooms. I went up with a master key to room 414. The room was stripped to the studs, no carpet, no wallpaper. As I stood in the center of the darkroom, I heard a clear, sharp scratch from inside the wall. Then a small, muffled voice said, "It's dark in here, let me out." I checked the history of the building. In the 1950s, a child had gone missing during the hotel's construction. They never found him. Construction hauntings are the worst because the spirits literally become part of the structure. That poor kid is probably still waiting for someone to open a door that doesn't exist anymore. I used to go urban exploring in abandoned hospitals. My friends and I went into an old psychiatric ward that had been closed since the 80s. We found a room that was perfectly preserved, files on the desk, a coffee mug, and a tape recorder. We pressed play on the recorder. It was a session with a patient who claimed he could hear what the walls were thinking. The doctor was skeptical until the patient started reciting exactly what my friends and I were wearing and what we had talked about in the car on the way to the hospital. The recording was dated 20 years before we were even born. At the end of the tape, the patient said, "They're standing in the room right now, aren't they, doctor?" Then the tape cut to static. This is a classic time slip or a precognition event. Some places seem to hold on to time differently, allowing people from the past to see into the future, or vice versa. I hope you guys left that hospital immediately. My family has a cabin in the mountains. We have a rule: if you're outside after dark and you hear a whistle, you don't whistle back. My cousin forgot the rule one night. He whistled back at a high-pitched sound coming from the woods. Immediately, the whistling started coming from 3 different directions, getting closer and closer. Something started throwing heavy rocks at the cabin walls. We huddled in the living room with the lights off. Whatever was out there started mimicking my cousin's whistle perfectly, but it sounded like it was being filtered through a throat full of water. It circled the house all night, scratching at the window screens. Whistling at night is a huge no-no in almost every indigenous culture. You're basically inviting something to find you. You're lucky that thing only scratched at the windows instead of finding a way inside. I was house sitting for a wealthy family in a gated community. The house was massive and full of expensive art. They had a life-sized Victorian doll in the foyer that I hated. Every time I walked past it, its eyes seemed to follow me. One night, I decided to cover it with a sheet so I could relax. About an hour later, I was in the kitchen when I heard a slow, dragging sound on the hardwood floor. I walked into the foyer, and the doll was gone. The sheet was lying on the floor. I found the doll sitting at the dining room table, holding a steak knife from the kitchen. I didn't stay to find out if it could move while I was looking at it. I locked myself in the car and waited for the owners to come home. I don't care how much they paid you, that house was not worth it. Dolls that move are a trope for a reason. There's something inherently wrong about an inanimate object that mimics human life. These stories aren't just fiction, they're the experiences that stay with people long after the sun comes up. They remind us that the world is much bigger, and much stranger, than we realize. So, the next time you hear a whistle in the woods or a scratch in the wall, don't be so sure you're alone. Sleep tight.